Good morning, Jackie Broman here. Happy Monday. The topic for today for our Facebook Live cast is the important roles in wills. So if you're looking to redo your wills or review them or never done them before, you need to have a little bit of a think about who's going to take these roles in your will before you come along to the appointment. Because we need the full names and addresses of these people. But it's not a huge deal if you don't, because in the first appointment with you, we run through this anyway, and we'd ask you who you wanted to fill these roles. And if you hadn't thought about it, or you didn't have their full names and addresses, you could go away and get those back to us before the next appointment. So, in a will, there are some usual components. So you start by revoking any previous will. You appoint an executor. You can make funeral directions if you want to. However, I do tell people that the only valid thing about what you want after you've passed away in terms of what you've done with your body is whether you're buried or cremated. So where you're buried or what ceremony you have is not binding. And that can be why it's really important to choose the right executor, because your executor is in control of your body after you pass away. So if your executor is someone you trust and you know they'll do what you want, then it's more likely for that to happen, even though it's not a binding thing in your will. And then you appoint guardians if you have minor children. And after that, you make clauses about the distribution of your estate to various beneficiaries. So going through that, I've mentioned the major roles then in your will. So your primary one is your executor. So the executor is the person who makes sure your estate is administered after you pass away. They make sure what you want outlined in your will happens. It's their role and responsibility to make sure that debts are paid and that everything's divided up evenly. Another term that we use as well in laws around wills is testator. Now that is you, the will maker. Testator or testatrix, it's an old-fashioned term, but it's a description for the will maker. Now the person you appoint as your executor may also become a trustee. So if you set up any trusts in your will, so any funds that may be held for a while for a beneficiary without actually being paid to them immediately gets held in trust, and your executor is usually the person who will manage those funds. If you don't want the executor to also be the trustee, you can appoint someone different. For example, if it's going to be a really long-term trust because you've only got little kids, but your executors might be a generation above you, you might have a different trustee there just in case something happens to the executor. A guardian. Now, I've spoken about a guardian before. If you've got children under 18, in your will you should say who you want your children to be looked after by. If you don't, it is up to your family to decide, and they might not be able to agree, and it may end up in the family court. So best that you actually specify who you want. And really good idea also to specify an alternate guardian in case your first guardian is unavailable or so their circumstances change and they can no longer do it. Beneficiaries. So these are the people who you leave inheritance to. So you could have a legacy beneficiary, so they only get a certain dollar amount of money, or you can have residuary beneficiaries. So the bulk of your estate is divided up into percentages to your residuary beneficiaries. Now you can have up to 4 executors, and an executor can also be a beneficiary. So just because they're a beneficiary doesn't rule them out from managing the estate. Now, who should you appoint as your executor in a will? Now, I've already mentioned it needs to be someone that you trust, because there are some aspects in your will that are non-binding. So you need someone that you know is going to respect your wishes. An executor should be someone who you expect to outlive you as well. You should be financially confident in them, particularly if they're going to be running a trust and holding funds for any period of time and having to invest those funds for a beneficiary. And then finally, make sure that they'd have the time and take the responsibility to take the role on. If it's someone who has a job that has them flying all over the place, then perhaps they may not have the time. But then again, sometimes if you want something done, you give it to someone who's busy. So that's something for you to consider. You know your family best and their personalities. So those are the things to consider when you're appointing an executor. Now, who can you leave your estate to? So the beneficiaries, like I said, can also be executors, so that doesn't rule them out. You can pretty much leave your estate to anyone you want, any person, any charity, in any way that you want. You've got testamentary freedom in Australia. However, that's curtailed slightly by legislation, which says you have moral obligations to certain people in your life. If you don't meet your moral obligations, then they could make a claim on your will. So that's a whole nother topic, but just know that in terms of who you choose as beneficiaries, it can be pretty much anyone. And then finally, in terms of guardians. So if someone's going to be looking after your children, they will have some access to funds that the children have held in trust for them. Depends on what powers you give them. You can give the executors the powers to enable the guardian to use funds for the education of the children. So then those two roles, the executors and the guardians, need to work together. And I always recommend that you don't have a conflict of interest there in the executor and the guardian being the same person. I don't mind if you also have an independent person in there as the executor, if the guardian is also an executor, but just make sure there's the independent check and balance there with an independent person so that the guardian just doesn't have access to all the funds to administer on behalf of the children. So at least two executors when children are underage, one of which can be the guardian. So that's run through the main roles in the wills: executors, trustees, guardians, beneficiaries. So those are the words that you need to be thinking about, the roles you need to be thinking about, full names and addresses of people there, and we'd go through with you anyway who was the best person for that role. So I hope that that's useful information. Remember, every Monday I do these short Facebook Live information sessions on a particular topic. So next Monday, catch me again live here. And if you need any further specific information, by all means, direct messages through Facebook. I get back to you within a day, or jump on our website and all our email addresses are available.